The sound of wind howling through empty fields, faint church bells in the distance. They say the ground remembers what men try to forget. In the small Pennsylvania town of Lornfield, no one speaks Herbert Prescott's name anymore. They sealed his story behind stone and silence. But the earth didn't stay quiet. Every spring, when the thaw comes, something rises from beneath his family's burial plot. Not bones, not ghosts. Something far worse. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The story begins in 1858, deep in the Allegheny region of Pennsylvania, a place that, even then, felt like it had fallen off the edge of the known world. Old maps marked the area as uninhabited swampland, yet tucked among the rolling hills was a village of 40 or so families, Lornfield. Hardly anyone outside ever heard of it, and that was how they liked it. At the center of the village lived a man named Herbert Prescott, a devout churchgoer, landowner, and by all accounts, a respected citizen. But behind closed doors, whispers painted a different picture, one of strange rituals, unexplainable disappearances, and a cellar that was never meant to be opened. It started with a child. 11-year-old Samuel Grover vanished on an early October morning. His footprints were found leading toward the Prescott property, but never away from it. The town searched for 3 days until the pastor declared it God's will. And then, everyone stopped asking. A year later, a drought struck the region, and the wells of Lornfield ran dry. All except for one, Prescott's. While the villagers begged for water, Herbert reportedly told them, "The Lord provides to those who honor their dead." No one knew what he meant then, but that phrase became the town's curse. Years after the man's death, the ground where he was buried refused to settle. The soil bulged, cracked open in strange shapes. Livestock avoided it. Children had nightmares about voices whispering under the earth, and in one local diary, found a century later, a line was written in trembling ink. Prescott was not buried in his coffin. He was buried in blood. And that's where our story begins, with a grave that breathes. Herbert Prescott's estate stood at the edge of the woods, where the pines grew so close together that daylight rarely touched the ground. Locals called it the Hollow House. Its wooden walls leaned slightly, like the land itself was rejecting its weight. By 1858, the structure was already decades old, older than the town itself, some said. The Prescott family came to Pennsylvania from Salem, Massachusetts, in the early 1800s, fleeing something they never named. Their ancestors were rumored to have been involved in the darker corners of the Puritan Church, the ones who didn't just chase witches, but tried to summon their own angels. The Prescotts brought few belongings with them, but among them was a locked iron chest. Every generation passed it down. No one ever claimed to know what was inside. Herbert inherited both the house and the chest when he turned 21. By then, his father and mother were already gone, both buried on the property. Some said Herbert had buried them himself before anyone could confirm their deaths. Visitors to the homestead described the air as heavy, the smell metallic. Flies lingered even in winter. The windows were covered from the inside, yet faint red light sometimes flickered through the cracks at night. Then there was the sound, a low, rhythmic pulse that drifted from the cellar whenever the wind died down. It wasn't quite mechanical, nor human. The neighbors called it the heart of the house, A traveling preacher once stayed with the Prescotts overnight. The next morning, he left without saying a word, refused to speak of what he'd seen, and died within the year. In his personal Bible, found later by his niece, one line had been underlined 3 times. The blood of the living must seal the covenant of the ground. Years later, when surveyors finally entered the property after Herbert's death, they found rooms that were hint on the blueprints. Narrow chambers dug into the earth, their walls stained in dark streaks that no one could identify. One of them contained that same iron chest, its lid slightly ajar, filled not with coins or relics, but with what looked like dried soil mixed with hair. Human hair. Lornfield's church burned down a week after that discovery. No one rebuilt it. The official records say Herbert Prescott died of apoplexy, what we'd now call a stroke, in December of 1858. But the townspeople who were there told another story. They said he didn't die quietly. They said the earth took him. It was a night of freezing rain, with thunder rolling across the valley like the voice of something ancient. Herbert's farmhand, a young man named Jonah Wicks, claimed that around midnight he heard a scream so loud it shook the walls. When he burst into the master's room, he found Herbert standing upright beside his bed. His hands crimson up to the wrists, his mouth moving in a language Jonah had never heard. The floorboards were soaked, not with water, but with blood, running in small streams toward the open cellar door. Herbert's eyes were open, but he didn't seem to see. He was mouthing something over and over again. "He's here. He's here. He's come for me." Jonah fled the property and fetched the town constable, but by the time they returned, Herbert was gone. Only a trail of blood led from the house to the burial field behind it. There, in the half-frozen mud, lay an open pit. Deep, too deep for a man to have dug alone. Inside it, the townspeople saw something glistening. Not a body, something else, something moving. The rain filled the pit as they watched, and by morning, it had vanished completely, leaving only churned earth and the faintest trace of human skin in the mud. The coroner, forced to sign the death certificate, refused to describe what he'd seen. He left town within days and never returned. A week later, Herbert's funeral was held in silence. The pastor read no scripture. The coffin was sealed before anyone could confirm what, if anything, was inside. His grave marker, carved hastily from riverstone, bore only his initials, HP, and that's the part of the story the town remembered. What they forgot, or pretended to, was what happened the next spring. When the ground began to bleed, when the first thaw came in March of 1859, the Prescott burial plot began to seep. At first, it was just damp earth, dark patches appearing along the mound where Herbert had been laid to rest. But then the smell followed. Iron. Decay. Something sweet beneath it, like rotting fruit. Neighbors said the soil turned red. They thought it was groundwater mixing with iron from the hills. But one woman, Mary Alcott, collected a jar of it. She took it to the local physician, Dr. Harland, who boiled the liquid to test for mineral content. What rose to the surface wasn't rust. It was coagulation. Blood. Within days, the doctor fell ill. He raved in his sleep, muttering about voices in the soil and a second heartbeat under the ground. Before he died, he scribbled one final note. Prescott's covenant was not with God. Rumors spread fast. Farmers refused to plow near the Prescott property. The water from their well turned thick, undrinkable. Chickens laid eggs streaked with crimson veins. Livestock miscarried. And every night, the air trembled with the sound of low humming, faint, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. Mary Alcott, desperate to prove what she'd seen, returned to the burial field with 2 other villagers. What they found made them run screaming back to town. The mound had split open, as though something beneath had tried to push upward. In the center lay the coffin lid, snapped clean in 2. Inside was a stain in the shape of a man. No bones, no flesh, just a perfect human outline, dark and wet against the wood. The pastor called it a punishment for disbelief. Others said it was the work of the devil himself. But old Jonas Wicks, the farmhand who'd seen Herbert's final night, refused that explanation. He told the townspeople it wasn't hell that took him, it was the ground. It's hungry now. That spring, 6 more graves in Lornfield began to leak. E-Town decided never to bury anyone again. They burned their dead after that. And yet, the Prescott plot still breathes. After 1859, Lornfield changed. The townspeople built fences around the Prescott land and banned anyone from crossing after dark. Children were told the soil was cursed, that it could take your name if you stepped too close. But the truth was far stranger and far quieter. In 1863, the state sent surveyors to remap the region. By then, the Civil War had drawn most able-bodied men away, and few cared what happened in a small town hidden in the hills. The surveyor's notes, however, remain in the state archives to this day. One page stands out. A hand-drawn sketch of the Prescott field, labeled simply, "Ground unstable. Sounds beneath." No one from the survey team ever filed another report. Their wagon was found abandoned 2 miles east, the horses still tethered. No human remains were ever recovered. The remaining families of Lornfield began to scatter. Some moved north toward Pittsburgh, others west toward Ohio. But they carried something with them. A story, a superstition, a name they refused to speak. By the 1890s, the town had vanished from most maps entirely. Its church lay in ruins, its graveyards empty, save one, the Prescott plot, fenced in by rusting iron bars that no one ever dared touch. When descendants of those families were later interviewed in the 1920s, many recalled the same nightmare. A pulsing sound in the dirt, red water filling their hands, a man's voice whispering, "You owe the ground." One woman, Sarah Wicks, great-granddaughter of the farmhand Jonah, claimed she visited the old site before it was swallowed by forest. She said the fence still stood, though twisted by vines. The earth inside the enclosure was black, like burned tar, and in the center was a depression, shaped like a human figure, lying just beneath the surface. She said the ground was warm. "If you're still watching," she whispered, "you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline?" The Prescott family's name was erased from records soon after. But every few decades, someone digging too deep in western Pennsylvania finds something buried they can't explain. Jars of hair, cracked headstones, bones with no coffins, and in some small towns nearby, wells that run red each spring. For almost a century, the story of Herbert Prescott was dismissed as rural folklore, a fever dream born from isolation and superstition. That changed in 1974. A team of state archaeologists working to document forgotten Pennsylvania settlements rediscovered what they thought was the site of Lornfield. They found fragments of pottery, rusted tools, and collapsed foundations. But when they reached the edge of the old burial field, their instruments began to fail. Compasses spun in circles. Soil readings came back inconsistent. High iron content, but no metallic deposits nearby. Then one of them, a geologist named Richard Halden, noticed something stranger. The deeper they dug, the darker the earth became. Not brown, not black, but deep red, almost the color of dried blood. When Halden took a sample back to Harrisburg, the lab results stunned him. The soil contained human hemoglobin. That report was never made public. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Miller, resigned within weeks. In a letter to a colleague, later unearthed through a Freedom of Information request, she wrote, "It isn't contamination. The readings are organic. Something was fed into that ground, not once, but continuously. It's as if the earth remembers the human form." Shortly after the team left, their excavation site was fenced off by a private entity. The same land later purchased by a company called Prescott Agricultural Holdings. No one seemed to know who owned it, but property records trace back to a single name, H. Prescott Trust, established 1861. Locals say security lights now guard the site, and that every year, on the same week in March, the lights flicker red for hours. No trespassers are caught. Only the sound of something heavy moving beneath the dirt, like breathing through soil. If you visit today, there's almost nothing left of Lornfield. Just trees, a few stone foundations, and a rusted iron gate marked HP. But some hikers claim that if you press your ear to the ground, you can hear the faintest heartbeat. Not fast, not slow, just steady, waiting. And those who've done it never seem to return the same. Some stories fade when the people do. Others keep breathing through the dirt. Herbert Prescott's tale isn't just about one man or one town. It's about what happens when a secret becomes part of the soil itself. In 2012, a private construction crew began clearing the area near what was once Lornfield. The company intended to build a small access road for timber trucks. On the second day of digging, their equipment struck something solid. Not stone, not wood, but something that sounded hollow. When they cleared the dirt away, they uncovered a coffin. Inside, there was no body, only a pool of dark, congealed liquid, still wet after more than a century. They called local authorities, but before anyone arrived, a storm swept in out of nowhere. Violent, sudden, tearing through the valley. The next morning, the site was gone. The trench had collapsed. The machinery was half buried in mud. Only one worker stayed long enough to tell what he saw. He said there was movement under the soil. He said the puddles were breathing. He said a voice whispered through the rain. He was never buried. He was planted. Since then, the area has been sealed off, officially for land instability. But satellite images show something strange. The soil of that valley from above forms a perfect dark circle, expanding year by year, as if something beneath is spreading. Historians can't explain it. Scientists won't talk about it. But locals still tell their children not to dig near the old woods of western Pennsylvania. Not because of ghosts, but because of what lies beneath. And if you visit in March, when the ground softens and the mist rolls low, you might hear it too. That faint, wet heartbeat rising from the earth. The sound of Herbert Prescott's blood burial, still feeding the ground that refused to forget him. Because the truth never stays buried. Not when the soil remembers your name.